This video is going to be on easing. So I'm going to take two pieces here and I'm going to have to fit them together. You can see that one is smaller than the other. So we're going to have to do something to have these raw edges or the ends of our seams to line up. So easing is something that is done to fit a larger piece of fabric with a smaller piece. And it's going to allow for a little bit of room for something like over your shoulder where you have a curve in your body, or any other area you have a curve where you don't want to use what's called a dart. So a dart is going to create a line of sewing to fit over a curve, but here we have just a tiny bit of area that needs to be managed, and we don't need to create like a big fold or a big dart over something like a shoulder or our shoulders along the back of our neck, any of that. So we're going to do a little bit of work here to put these two pieces together. Some people talk about easing as in fitting the larger piece to the smaller piece by gathering a little bit. Some people talk about easing as in stretching the larger piece, or sorry, the smaller piece to fit the larger piece. Either way, it's just a tiny bit of manipulation. I'm going to show you how to do that. This piece was cut on the bias, so it's going to make stretching this one so much easier. So I'm going to grab my pins and we're going to put these two together. Okay, so I have my smaller piece on top so that I can see what I'm doing with it. And we know that notches are there to help us line up our pieces. So I'm going to do that first, and I'm going to pin at this point to secure my fabric, and now I can start to work with it the rest of the way, not having to do much manipulation here. I'm going to pin that in place. So we're going to work from the center out, and now I'm going to pull this so that I have my pieces lining up at the end here. Okay. And in between, I want to make sure that I don't have fabric shifting too much to one place or the other, especially with this large piece back here. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a tug and even that out so that now I can pin things in place. Okay. And you could also pull this along and pin, pull it along and pin, but I like to know that my piece is going to line up at the end. Okay. Just like that. So now I've got the pieces here lined up. You can see that there isn't a whole lot of fabric from this back piece in any one section. It's kind of evenly distributed, and this piece is stretched out to meet it. So I'm going to now take this to my sewing machine. Now I'm ready to sew. A tip for doing this with actual garments would be to have the larger piece underneath so that you can kind of help it along. But on this small scale piece, you're not going to see too much of a need for that. What we're trying to do is sew a straight line, and in the end we should have a nice seam that lays flat with no folds and no gathers. So I'm going to sew back stitching at the beginning and end, taking out my pins as I go. You should be using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I should now be able to lay this open and finger press it even, okay, just for you to see. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the iron. You can see just a tiny bit of what looks like baby gathers, but once I take this to the iron and press my seam open, those should go away. And understand that this is supposed to fit over a curve, so if this was going over a shoulder, you wouldn't see any of those little tiny gathers. But I'm going to go ahead and take it to the iron and show you what it looks like after. Alright, with my seam pressed open, you can now see that my edges line up and I don't have any puckering. So you have just successfully eased two pieces of fabric together.